Brooke Lee Foster, welcome to the Tiny Interview Network.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. It's actually, I realize, the Tiny News Network, which shows how committed I am to this network that I sometimes forget the name. It's really tough around here. But as we've discussed, it's summer and we're all just doing our best.
Yes, we're trying to stay afloat here.
Yes, exactly. Well, so today we are talking about appropriately a wonderful summer book, All the Summers in Between, which is your book. I finished it on Sunday and I loved it. It was a
Yay.
delight.
That is amazing. Thank you. I feel like as writers, we do so much of our work all by ourselves and we never know how a book is going to be received. So that means so much. Thank you.
Oh, it was a pleasure. And it's actually been very helpful to me because I'm working on my first draft of a novel and I kept thinking, okay, so some books can get to the end of the rainbow, right? Because you're
Yeah.
right. When you're writing, you're just sort of like, well, I don't know if this is good. And also I don't know if it's going to work. And I guess I'll just ask someone else later.
Yeah. And you're
Yeah.
on your 100th draft and you're thinking, will I ever see this like to the end? Will I ever type in the end? Right?
It is a very valid question, especially with a book like this too. You did a really good job with the dual timelines and kind of keeping them. Well, I guess we would call them dual timelines, would we?
Yeah.
Or would you say
Yeah.
flashbacks?
No, it's dual
Okay.
timeline. Yeah. Yeah. Because half the book is in 1967 and half is in 1977. So I wrote it as a dual timeline.
Okay. And when you wrote, give us real quick just the elevator description of All the Summers in Between.
Okay, so All the Summers in Between is about two friends who meet in 1967 at the age of 20 out in Eastern Long Island in East Hampton. They get close really fast. It's one of those friendships where you don't know where one begins and the other ends. And something terrible happens toward the end of the summer, and they grow estranged for 10 years. And the book begins in 1977, the later timeline, when one of the friends, the wealthy city girl versus the local kind of hardscrabble beach girl, the wealthy city girl quite literally sails back into the other's life asking for help. And therefore, these friends are forced to, face this terrible secret they've been keeping. It's the friend that got away that suddenly comes back into your life, and you're trying to decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But also how far they've come as women. Their lives aren't quite where they hoped they would be when they started out at the age of 20. They're now 30. And so they're kind of grappling with all of these issues and themes in the book.
It's so well done. I loved in the first chapter just reading about Thea and thinking, oh, I can identify with this. Like, it's an amazing, there are so many moments where you think the more things change, the more they stay the same. Where you're looking at a woman in 1970 basically hosting her own birthday party. And I'm thinking, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, exactly. I've been cutting my own cake. Yes. I know. And that's why I love writing historical fiction, because I just feel like there's so many universal truths. It doesn't matter if you're in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, we're still, as women, grappling with a lot of the same issues. We're still doing the majority of the housework and cutting all the fruit and throwing our own birthday parties and really taking on the emotional baggage of a home, which I feel very strongly in my life. And so I wanted that to come through this one character, Thea, who really feels like she's saddled it all for the last 10 years and kind of figuring out, where do I fit back in? Can I fit back into this life that I love? Like, she loves her husband, she loves her kid. There's nothing, she's not trying to get a divorce. She's not, but she's just like, where am I in all this, and trying to fit herself back in.
Yes. And you write that journey for her so well because I think those sorts of corrections, if you're course correcting, it's so hard not to overcorrect. And even a correction in the life of the rest of the people around you can be very unexpected. So that's impacting her husband and her daughter, and then obviously Margot's appearance. But I really loved how you did that. I very much identified with both of the characters at different points. So
Yeah.
what was the experience like for you writing this one? Because you've written a number of books. I
Yeah.
mean, so how was this one?
Well, it's funny because now that I have three books, people always say to me, do you see a common theme in your books? Do you keep coming back to something because they say that with authors, we sort of obsess over something and we find ourselves kind of coming back to it in each book and working through it. And I was talking with some author friends and I was like, you know what? I think that all of my books, at the most general, not the plot, but in the
Sure.
most general theme, are about women finding the courage to go to the people they love and ask for what they need. And it's really in all three of my books, even though they're in three different timelines and three very different stories. And so with this book, I would say I tried really hard, and I hadn't identified that as a theme, but I
Mm,
tried really hard to kind of write away from that. And I just found myself right back in it. It was just with two friends now and with a different set of relationships. But with this book, Dual Timeline was so much harder than my other two novels, I have to say. And my other two novels were brutal too. Writing novels, as you know, Julie, is just so hard. And it never, you want to believe that you're going to sit down and the words are just going to fly out of your fingers beautifully on the page. That is not ever what happens. There's so much toiling in your seat and figuring things out. But I will say, Dual Timeline is like writing two books in the same amount of pages. So I found out really quickly that I kind of actually broke them up into two different Word docs. So I had like the 1967,
okay.
characters, and then the 1977 story and characters. And then later figured out how to splice them back together with all sorts of Easter eggs in both timelines and making sure the rhythm felt right in terms of the characters kind of going back and forth in time. But yeah, so it was hard. And because I was a journalist for 20 years, I really believe in writing rough, messy, terrible drafts that are going to get better in revision. I love revision. I like it so much better than drafting.
Same.
And kind of, right? Because
Yes.
me and you and I are very rare actually, because when I
Oh,
talk to other writers, they're like, you like revision? And I'm like, I love revision. Because that's like where
absolutely.
you're under the hood, right, of the car,
Yes.
and you're making all the adjustments and chiseling away and figuring out exactly what the story is. And so I wrote this book the fastest of all three of my books, but it was no easier. It was like, I remember just thinking, like, emailing even some of my author friends and just saying, like, does it get easier ever? And everyone's like, no, it doesn't. But I will say there's still so much joy in it, right? We do it again and again because we love it. And I love this story and I love these characters and I loved putting them in all of these really complicated situations where then what their choice was, how they decided to handle that moment said so much about who they were and kind of figuring out, what you would do if you were on a boat in the middle of the Long Island Sound and being asked to do certain things, or not the Long Island Sound, actually it was Gardner's Bay, to do things by this friend that maybe you weren't sure you wanted to do. And, there's some stuff that goes on in this book that was really, really fascinating to write, in part, I think, because of my own friendships and challenges and friendships over time.
Yes. I thought so much of the tension. I took a note here in my questions for you. The friendships at different seasons of your life. I find that theme, there's so much to mine there, especially for women, because reading about Thea and Margot when they're young, just the intensity of a young friendship like that, and you really are, it's like you have a crush on someone, and that just attraction to them. And then that can be a person you never speak to again, which is
Right. It's so
really
weird,
sort of
right?
strange. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the expectations are so great when you're that young. I feel like when I was that age, my identity was so built upon who I was friends with, right? Like if I didn't talk
Yes.
to my friend at the end of every day, the day didn't feel real. Like now people put stuff on social media. We didn't have that then. We got on the phone and had to talk and tell each other what happened and the craziest thing and all these silly things and also serious, right? But I just feel like I needed my friends as totems back then so much more. And then as I got married and had kids and my career, established my career and got much more secure in my identity, I still needed my women friends so much, but I needed them so differently. It wasn't to prop up my self-esteem or boost my confidence. It was to really support me and make me laugh and like take me out of some of the seriousness of raising young kids, or even just like bouncing ideas off each other about how to get a kid to sleep, right? So much of that friendship changes. And I've always been really fascinated by that. I mean, I've had friends, I don't know if you've had a friend that got away, but I've definitely had friends that got away. And those relationships hurt, even though they're so far away and they're not even relationships you think of on a daily basis. But every once in a while, you'll think of that person fondly or resentfully, and you're sort of figuring out still how you feel about them being gone from your life. So I love the idea of this friend from the past who kind of caused you all of this tenderness, in your life, a soreness that kind of got left behind, and there's being a lot of regret there and a lot of things, unfinished conversations is kind of how I would put it. And then having them suddenly come back, and how that would look for these particular two friends.
It's an interesting thing to think about, and especially because you wrote it in the time period in which you did, because you don't have the internet and social media, so there's not that same sort of element of this person may be the one that got away, but I sort of still know what happens in their life and have this loose connection to them. And
Right. No, like they're just gone at that
they're
time
gone.
period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think just seeing some of that, and you're exactly right, the way that friendships when you're young serve a different purpose than when you're older. But I can also feel that starting to come back around as my kids get older, because, you're in this section of time with children in which a lot of your activities are dictated by what the kids are doing.
Yes.
And then once that goes away, it becomes a little bit more of, oh, I'm who am I choosing to be with and why, and those motivations shift.
It's much more purposeful, right?
Yes,
Yes.
indeed.
And then the other thing I was talking about with my friends recently, because I have a very tight-knit book club, there's about 12 of us. And while we really do read the books and really get into the conversation, we're not wine drinkers. Like, we drink tea and seltzer at our book club meetings. We're really serious about it.
Yeah.
We also talk so much about our changing lives and parenting and all that. And one of them recently said, because a lot of my friends, I have a 9-year-old, but a lot of my friends just have high schoolers like you. And they were saying, we might leave the neighborhood soon. And then what does that mean for these friendships? Like, a lot of the, close relationships that are built on being in the same school district or the same geographic region, then those, you're sort of reconfiguring friendships all over again, which is like, oh my God.
Absolutely.
Right?
I hope that you told that person, look, you're allowed to move. Just know that I will be burning down your new house so that you will move back. So go ahead.
I love that.
And you do you, but I will. Now you know what's happening.
Yes, exactly.
It is. It's
so
really
funny.
crazy when people, you think about it and it's like, oh yeah, you're in the next season. Brief turn. I am obsessed with this cover.
Oh,
Did you love it?
Me too. Yes. And there's a whole story behind it. So
I want to hear it.
Can you see this painting behind me?
Yes.
That's a T.S. Harris painting. And I have 3 of her paintings in my house. She's a Laguna Beach based painter, and she sells her work on One Kings Lane, Artfully Walls, all the major sites.
Yeah.
But I've discovered her a few years ago, and she paints what she calls sunshine noir, which is like beach scenes with a dark thread going through them, which is exactly what I write, right? You're always going to be in a sparkly setting, but things are more complicated than they seem on the surface in my books. And so my editor came to me and she said, do you have any ideas? Sort of what they do in publishing. Do you have any ideas to send the design director? And I was like, you know what, for book 3, I really beg you to look at the paintings of T.S. Harris. So they immediately loved them. They licensed 3 images. Right as they were licensing them, one image got snapped away. And we were like, oh, someone else just licensed that. Interesting. We saw 2 covers. The one that became the cover with the white bikini is the one that we immediately just gravitated towards. She looks 20 years old. You can tell that there's a lot of intrigue, mystery about her sitting on this pool. It's not like she's just, her legs are flapping back and forth. Like, she's thinking something, She just suited the book so well. And then we came to find out that Beatrice Williams, who actually is one of my favorite authors of all time, her new book, Husbands and Lovers, was that image that we went to get. So her publishing team got that one. But it's so funny because we both got the right images for her books, because hers is a red bathing suit and her book is Husbands and Lovers, and it's much more seductive. But anyway, I don't even believe I'm going to get to say this because I loved her book so long before I knew her, but now we are friends, and we were chatting on a podcast recently about how we have the 2 best looking covers on the news in like bookstores this summer, because they both have the T.S. Harris paintings. So it's like, they're amazing.
That's amazing. I was so interested. That's so funny you say that, because I was going to mention that there are a few books out right now that have this look.
Yes,
and I'm
the
always
other
surprised.
One is the Divorcees.
The Divorcees,
right?
yes.
That's also a T.S. Harris painting.
Okay.
I
feel very excited about feeling ahead of the curve on this one.
You totally figured that out.
I really was, because when I picked this up, I was like, I love this cover, but I always think it's interesting when you see multiple covers. I also think what's perfect is the font treatment they chose for yours, which just shows you can have similar similar kind of themes to or similar painting, similar art, but every book, every vibe is totally different, like you said, with Husbands and Lovers. But
Yes.
that is so fun. I love it. And now you get to be friends with her.
My
Congratulations.
gosh, I know, seriously. I'm like, oh, I fangirled her way too much. I'm like, I gotta pull it back. Now we're just friends. Like, I gotta stop.
No, nope. Jump in the deep end. Keep going and bring me with you, please. Because The Secret Life of Violet Grant is one of my
Yes,
all-time favorites.
yes, I have that right over here. Yes, that's so funny. I
Such a
know.
good book. And that's one of her earlier ones, but
Yeah.
I can't wait to read
Well,
Husbands and
her
Lovers.
first book, A Hundred Summers. I read that book on Martha's
Yes.
Vineyard years ago, and that takes place in Newport in 1938 and 1931. And I remember closing the cover and thinking, if I ever get to write fiction, this is the kind of book I want to write. I just love that it wasn't World War II. We were at a beach, but we were capturing this specific moment in time. And I just thought that was
Yes.
amazing, you know? And so with all the summers in between, I sort of try to do something similar in that I chose that time period to set this friendship up, in part just because of women were riding such a wave of optimism in the late 60s. You know, the National
Yeah.
Organization of Women has been formed. You had the Equal Rights Amendment in Congress. They were talking about a gender-based, you know, clause, a gender discrimination clause. It didn't pass until 71, but they were talking about it. You know, Grace Slick in Jefferson Airplane is yelling, "We're the people your parents warned you about." You know, there's so much happening in the late 60s, and women are really riding that tide of change and believing these two characters really believe that their lives are going to look so much different than their mothers did. And then to have that latter timeline, which is what in the 70s, it all kind of felt like a big fat hangover, and have these women realize that their lives actually aren't that different, I thought was a really powerful snapshot in time, politically for women to just look at how, you know, they really saw Woodstock and all of these things happening as being the arbiter of big change, and it just never came to be. And to revisit them at this later age and see them grappling with that was very powerful to me. I thought that it was very interesting to um, kind of get into the way women's lives just didn't quite, you know, it didn't come out to be the way that they thought. So
Absolutely. I agree. Well, I think I could talk to you all day about this book.
yeah.
I also want to, when you were talking about A Hundred Summers too, when I think back, that cover was more like a drawn version of this. You know what I mean? It had that
It had an
same,
umbrella, remember?
yes. Wasn't she wearing a hat though too? I'm thinking, sorry, it was more like Husbands and Lovers. I'm going to have to look now. Was she wearing a red
Yeah.
swimsuit? I thought she was.
I think there's two friends on a beach under an umbrella, and I feel like the sky
Okay.
was kind of blue aqua and the umbrella was red, and it was very old-fashioned looking. Very different than our beach umbrellas.
Interesting. Okay, I'm gonna go back and look. These are the things I love cover design.
Same.
And I want to secretly be a designer, but obviously
Same.
that's
Right? If like there's something else you could do, I always
yes.
say that. I would love, so in all the summers in between, she wants to be a commercial artist. And that's partly like my secret dream. It's like I would love to design album covers, book covers, right? It's like magazine.
Yes. Yes. When I was reading that and she was and talking about putting the letters into this kind of floral moment with the
Yes.
logo she was making, I was like, yep, that's what I want to do. But I'm not a very good, I'm not an good at drawing, I should say, yet. I would tell the kids at school, but whatever. I mean, I don't think
right.
it's going to happen for me, so it's fine.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that we share that in common. There's such an appreciation. I mean, they're just acts of beauty. So I love,
They are.
or objects of beauty. So I love seeing that. Oh, good. Maybe we should have a amateur graphic designers club, and we
Oh my
could
gosh.
make fake books
I
for
mean,
Hallmark
I
movies.
don't know about you, but I find I'm in Canva all the time just designing something for social media.
Yes.
Like, I mean, that's what I end up doing it for. But yeah, I do a lot. And so I'm not very good. Like I always try to channel my old magazine design directors, like remembering what they would do and how they would get the perspectives right. But, you know, I just dabble for fun.
I love dabbling for fun. And Canva makes us all feel like we are graphic designers. So it's
Yeah,
perfect. You're like, look at me. Whereas real designers are probably like, oh my gosh, this is like,
I know, they're like, this is horrible.
yeah, please stop. Please stop pretending. We love you and stop. Okay, so the note I want to end on is that I think one of the themes in this book that I really liked is loving someone is giving them permission to change and permission to grow. And you have a line about that, but just this sort of idea. In your life, who is someone that has given you that permission to grow?
Oh my gosh. I have to say, I've been so lucky to have so many people, but the
Mm.
one that's been most meaningful to me is my husband. Because I think that when you get married and you have kids, there's a constant renegotiation for time, for dreams, for who gets to stop making a big salary, right? To go and write fiction, which feels very flighty.
Yep.
Um, and I just think that when I had this idea for my first novel, sorry, when I had an idea for my first novel, it was very scary for me to stop taking paid journalism work temporarily, and write that book. But I remember going to my husband and saying, I can't get these characters out of my mind. And you know, when you're sort of embarrassed to admit something, but know you're going to do it and you're going to ask for it, but you're sort of like with this person you're so comfortable with, and I've been with since I'm 19. I mean, my husband and I have been together, we're best friends. And I just remember kind of skirting around and being like, I really think I have to go for this. And he was like, Of course you do. Of
Mm.
course you have to try. And it just meant so much to me because it was actually a really hard ask. I don't know why. I think it's just that hang up we have as moms that like we can't take time away from our kids and like the kids are always first. And they are, but it's okay sometimes to fit yourself back in, right? Kind of what we talked about earlier.
Hmm.
Um, and so having that, not permission, but that support and that love behind me when I started working on my first book just meant the world to me because it allowed me to daydream and dream that maybe I could do it. And maybe it was okay to take the time to do it. And so that's, I think, where a lot of that comes from.
I am so glad that he did because we are better for it. I mean, you're just a beautiful writer, and I really enjoyed this book. I can't wait for more people to get their hands on it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks
I
for
can't
being a
wait to
guest.
read your book
Well, I'm excited to hear it. But
for
yes,
next book because I know you already have a
oh,
book. But
oh,
you
yeah, that one. Yeah, it's going great. I'm crushing it. I mean, we were talking earlier and I was just pretending like it's hard because it's really just so easy. I just sit down and I'm like, oh, look, I'm already at 75,000 words. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence. Thank you so much for your time and for being such a delightful guest. I can't wait to make sure, and I do have an extra copy of this that I will be giving away. So I'm very
Oh,
excited
yay.
about that.
Awesome.
All right, thanks, friend.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.